Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English story. The stage lights were warm on Henry's face as he stood before a packed auditorium. The murmurs of anticipation settled as he began to speak, his voice calm yet rich with emotion. Good evening, everyone. I'm Henry Lawson, and tonight, I want to share something deeply personal with you. Not about my movies or awards, but about the journey behind the scenes, a journey to find happiness. Henry paused, looking out into the sea of faces. Some held notebooks. Others leaned forward, eager to listen. When I was a kid, he began, I used to believe happiness came from achieving big things, being someone important, someone people admired. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone. Success, in my eyes, was the ticket out of there. I told myself, if I make it to Hollywood, I'll finally be happy. The chase begins. Henry's story unfolded with a vividness that transported the audience. As a young man, I chased the dream relentlessly. I worked odd jobs, saved every penny, and moved to Los Angeles with nothing but a suitcase and a head full of ambition. Those early years were tough, rejections piled up, and I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake. But then, I got my first break. A small role in a TV show. And I thought, this is it. This is where happiness starts. The crowd chuckled softly, sensing where the story was going. Of course, it wasn't. That small role led to another, then another. Eventually, I landed lead roles. Fame, fortune, they all came rushing in. I bought a big house, a flashy car, and went to glamorous parties. On the surface, I was living the dream, but inside, I felt a hollow. Henry's tone softened, and the room grew quieter. I remember sitting in my mansion one night, surrounded by everything I'd ever wanted. I should have been ecstatic, but all I felt was this aching emptiness. I couldn't understand it. I had everything I'd worked for, yet something was missing. Searching for answers, Henry explained how he tried to fill the void. I threw myself into more work. I thought maybe I just needed another hit movie, another award, another accolade. But no matter how much I achieved, the feeling stayed. It was like chasing a shadow, always just out of reach. One day, Henry found himself talking to an old friend, Marcus, someone he hadn't seen since his pre-fame days. Marcus wasn't wealthy or famous, but he was happy, genuinely happy. I asked him, how do you do it? How are you so content? And he said something that stuck with me. Happiness isn't something you find out there, Henry. It's something you create in here, Henry said, tapping his chest. Those words planted a seed. I started to think about what Marcus meant. I realized I'd been looking for happiness in all the wrong places. I was chasing external things, money, status, approval, thinking they'd make me feel whole. But maybe, just maybe, the answer was somewhere else. Turning point. Henry shared a pivotal moment from his life. There was one night, I'll never forget it. I was filming overseas and decided to take a walk after a long day on set. I wandered into this quiet little village. The people there didn't have much by Hollywood standards, but they were laughing, sharing meals, enjoying each other's company. For the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me. Peace, connection, gratitude. The experience made Henry question everything he thought he knew about happiness. It wasn't about what they had. It was about how they lived. They valued relationships, community, and the simple joys of life. I realized I'd been so focused on climbing the ladder of success that I'd forgotten to enjoy the climb. Henry smiled wistfully. That night, I made a decision. I didn't want to just exist. I wanted to live, really live. And to do that, I needed to redefine what happiness meant to me. The first steps. Henry told the audience how he began making small but meaningful changes. I started journaling, reflecting on what truly made me happy. I reconnected with old friends, spent more time with family, and allowed myself to pursue hobbies I'd neglected, like painting and hiking. First, felt strange, almost selfish, to focus on these things. But little by little, I felt lighter, more present, more me. The crowd nodded in understanding, many relating to his words. I realized happiness wasn't a destination. It was a series of small, everyday choices, choosing gratitude over comparison, connection over isolation, authenticity over perfection. And the best part? It wasn't something anyone else could give me. It was something I had to create for myself. Henry paused, his voice filled with emotion. Looking back, that realization was the turning point. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it gave me hope, a sense of control over my own happiness. And that was more valuable than any award or paycheck. Henry took a sip of water and continued, his voice steady yet heartfelt. After that night in the village, I knew I had to make real changes in my life. But let me tell you, it wasn't easy. For years, I had trained myself to equate happiness with achievement, to measure my worth by what others thought of me. Breaking free from that mindset felt like unlearning a language I'd spoken my whole life. He smiled gently. But sometimes, the hardest journeys are the ones most worth taking. Reconnecting with passions. Henry explained how he started to reconnect with his passions. When I was younger, before I ever dreamed of becoming an actor, I loved painting. It was something I did purely for myself, no audience, no critics, just me, canvas, and some paint. But as my acting career took off, I abandoned it. Who had time for painting when there were scripts to memorize and premieres to attend? He shook his head. Looking back, I realized that painting was never about the end result. It was about the process, the joy of creating something, even if no one else saw it. So, one day, I bought some art supplies, sat down in my backyard, and started painting again. Henry chuckled, recalling the memory. My first painting was terrible, just a mess of colors. But it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt truly present. I wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. I was just there. And that, I realized, was happiness. Letting go of perfection. Another lesson came when Henry decided to step away from his social media accounts. I used to spend hours scrolling through Instagram, comparing myself to others. It didn't matter how successful I was. There was always someone with a bigger house, a better role, or a more glamorous life. Social media became this endless cycle of comparison, and it was draining my happiness. One day, Henry made the bold choice to delete the apps from his phone. At first, felt strange. I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, only to remember I'd removed them. But over time, I felt a weight lift. Without that constant stream of other people's lives, I could focus on my own. I started to appreciate what I had, instead of obsessing over what I didn't. The audience nodded in agreement, many relating to his struggle. Letting go of perfection wasn't just about social media, Henry added. It was about accepting myself, flaws and all. I stopped trying to be the perfect actor, the perfect friend, the perfect anything. Instead, I focused on being the best version of me. And you know what? That was enough. Nurturing relationships. Henry's journey also led him to reevaluate his relationships. For years, I was so busy chasing success that I neglected the people who mattered most. I'd miss family dinners, cancel plans with friends, and tell myself I'd make it up to them someday. But the truth is, someday doesn't always come. Henry's voice grew softer. I lost my dad a few years ago. We weren't estranged, but I wasn't as present as I should have been. I was always too busy, too focused on my career. When he passed, I realized how much time I'd wasted, time I could never get back. The regret was evident in his expression, but so was his determination to change. After that, I made a promise to myself. No more excuses. I started calling my mom every week, no matter how hectic my schedule was. I made time for my friends, even if it meant saying no to work sometimes. And you know what? Those moments, sharing a laugh, having a deep conversation, they brought me more happiness than any award ever could. Finding joy in simplicity. Henry shared how he began to find joy in the simple things. Before, my life was all about big moments, opening nights, red carpets, blockbuster releases. But I realized happiness isn't just about the big things. It's also in the small, everyday moments. He smiled, his eyes warm. It's in watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee. It's in the sound of rain on the roof. Or the feeling of sand between your toes. It's in the quiet moments, the ones we often overlook because we're too busy chasing the next big thing. Henry paused, letting his words sink in. For me, one of those moments came during a walk in the park. There was nothing special about it, just me, the trees, and the sound of birds. But for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. And I realized happiness isn't about where you are or what you have. It's about how you see the world. A new definition of success. As Henry continued, he shared how his journey had reshaped his definition of success. For the longest time, I thought success was about being the best, winning awards, earning millions, being admired. But now, I see it differently. Success, to me, is waking up every day and feeling good about the person I am. It's living a life that's true to my values, not someone else's expectations. He smiled, his gaze steady. That doesn't mean I don't care about my career. I still love acting, and I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had. But now, my career is just one part of my life, not my entire identity. And that balance has made all the difference. Closing reflections. As Henry reached the end of his story, he looked out at the audience, his expression earnest. I won't lie to you, this journey hasn't been easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, when it felt like I was taking one step forward and two steps back. But every small step, every tiny change, added up. And today, I can honestly say I'm happier than I've ever been. Not because my life is perfect, but because I've learned to appreciate it for what it is. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Happiness isn't something you find out there. It's something you create. One moment, one choice at a time. And if I can do it, so can you. The audience erupted into applause, moved by Henry's vulnerability and wisdom. As he stepped off the stage, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from the cheers or the spotlight, but from knowing he had shared something meaningful, something real. Henry stepped back onto the stage after a short break, greeted by another wave of applause. He smiled, this time feeling more connected to the audience than ever before. Thank you, he said, his voice warm. It means a lot to know my story resonates with you. I want to take you deeper into the journey, because while finding happiness is important, maintaining it takes practice and intention. He paced slowly, his hands gesturing naturally. Let me tell you about the time I thought I'd figured it all out, only to realize I still had a long way to go. The illusion of having it all together. Henry shared a story about his first attempt at change. After I started reconnecting with my passions, stepping back from social media, and prioritizing relationships, I thought I'd cracked the code to happiness. For a few months, life felt lighter. I was painting again, spending time with loved ones, and enjoying the little things. But then, out of nowhere, The old feelings crept back in. He sighed, the memory still vivid. It was a film premiere, one of those glitzy events where everyone looks perfect, and you feel like you're under a microscope. I remember standing on the red carpet, smiling for the cameras, but inside, I felt off. I caught myself wondering, do I look as good as that actor over there? Is my career as impressive as theirs? Henry paused, letting the vulnerability land. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Even after all the changes I'd made, I was still seeking validation from others. I realized happiness isn't a destination you reach and stay at forever. It's a practice, something you have to nurture every day. Building emotional resilience. Henry explained how he started building emotional resilience to handle these moments. I began working with a coach, someone who helped me dig deeper. She introduced me to a simple but powerful concept: self-compassion. It's funny, isn't it? We're so quick to be kind to others but so harsh on ourselves. My coach taught me to talk to myself the way I talk to a friend. He smiled softly. So, when that voice in my head said, "You're not good enough," I'd respond with, "You're doing your best, and that's enough." It felt strange at first, but over time, it became natural. And let me tell you, it's a game changer. Henry shared another technique he'd learned: gratitude journaling. Every night, I'd write down 3 things I was grateful for. They didn't have to be big. Sometimes, it was just a good cup of coffee or a kind word from a stranger. But those little moments of gratitude helped shift my focus from what I lacked to what I already had. And that, my friends, is where happiness truly begins. Reevaluating priorities. Henry also reflected on how he reevaluated his priorities. There was a time when I thought being busy meant being important. My schedule was packed from morning to night, and I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor. But deep down, I wasn't fulfilled, I was just distracted. He chuckled, shaking his head. So, I started saying no. No to projects that didn't align with my values. No to events that drained me. No to people who only wanted to take without giving. And you know what? Saying no created space for the things that truly mattered: my health, my relationships, my peace of mind. Henry leaned forward slightly, his tone earnest. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's this: your time and energy are precious. Don't waste them on things that don't bring you closer to the life you want. The power of vulnerability. One of the most transformative moments in Henry's journey came when he allowed himself to be vulnerable. For years, I hid behind a mask. I wanted people to see me as confident, successful, unshakable. But the truth is, we're all human. We all have fears, insecurities, and moments of doubt. Pretending otherwise doesn't make you strong. It makes you lonely. Henry described how he began opening up to the people in his life. I started having real conversations with my friends and family, not just about the good stuff, but about my struggles too. And you know what? They didn't judge me. If anything, it brought us closer. Vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's a bridge. Connects us in ways nothing else can. Finding balance. Henry also spoke about finding balance between ambition and contentment. I used to think I had to choose between being successful and being happy. But now I see it differently. Ambition isn't the enemy of happiness. Attachment is. When you tie your self-worth to your achievements, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. But when you pursue your goals out of passion and curiosity, rather than a need for validation, that's where the magic happens. He smiled, his eyes bright with conviction. These days, I still set goals. I still work hard. But I don't let my success or lack thereof define me. I've learned that who I am is enough, no matter what. Closing reflections. As Henry reached the end of his talk, he paused, looking out at the audience with gratitude. I know this journey isn't easy. It takes courage to look within, to confront your fears and change your habits. But I promise you, it's worth it. Because happiness isn't out there, it's right here. He placed a hand over his heart. It's in the way you treat yourself. It's in the choices you make every day. It's in the love you give and the love you allow yourself to receive. Henry's voice grew softer, yet more powerful. So, my friends, don't wait for happiness to find you. Create it. Chase it. Not in the world around you, but in the person you already are. The audience erupted into applause, their faces filled with hope and inspiration. Henry stepped off the stage, his heart full, knowing he had shared something real, something that mattered. Henry returned to the stage after another short break, the energy in the room palpable. He could see the eagerness in the audience's eyes, their anticipation for the next chapter of his story. He smiled, taking a moment to center himself before speaking. Thank you for staying with me on this journey. He began, his voice steady. We've talked about the struggles, the lessons, and the small victories. Now, I want to take you to a place where all those pieces came together, a moment where I realized the essence of true happiness. The joy in giving back. Henry leaned against the podium, his expression thoughtful. It was about 3 years ago, he said. I had started to feel more balanced, more grounded. But there was still something missing, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. That's when I decided to volunteer at a local community center. He described the experience vividly. The center hosted acting workshops for kids from underprivileged backgrounds. First, I thought I'd be teaching them about drama and stagecraft. But what I didn't expect was how much they'd teach me. Henry chuckled softly, his eyes lighting up. These kids, they had so much joy, so much creativity, even in the face of challenges I couldn't imagine. They reminded me of why I fell in love with acting in the first place. It wasn't about the fame or the money. It was about storytelling, connection, and the pure joy of creation. He paused, letting the memory wash over him. Giving my time and energy to those kids wasn't just fulfilling, it was healing. It reminded me that happiness isn't just about what you achieve for yourself. It's also about what you give to others. Letting go of perfection. Henry then shared another important realization that had transformed his life. The power of letting go of perfection. For the longest time, I was obsessed with being perfect. Perfect in my performances, perfect in my public image, perfect in everything I did. But you know what perfection really is? It's a trap. It's this unattainable ideal that keeps you from appreciating what's right in front of you. He smiled ruefully. I remember one particular moment when I was on set, filming a scene I'd rehearsed countless times. I was so focused on getting every line and every movement exactly right that I ended up feeling stiff and unnatural. My director finally pulled me aside and said, "Henry, stop trying to be perfect. Just be real." Henry's voice softened, the lesson still fresh in his heart. That advice didn't just change that scene, it changed my life. I started embracing my flaws, my quirks, my humanity. And you know what? People connected with me more because of it. Perfection isn't relatable. Authenticity is. Facing the fear of being alone. Henry shared another deeply personal story, one about loneliness. There was a time when I couldn't stand being alone with my thoughts. I'd fill every moment with distractions, work, social media, parties, anything to avoid the silence. But at some point, I realized that the fear of being alone wasn't about loneliness. It was about not liking the person I was when I was by myself. He let the words hang in the air, their weight undeniable. So, I made a commitment to spend more time with myself. I started meditating, journaling, and just sitting in silence. It wasn't easy at first. It was downright uncomfortable. But over time, I began to see myself not as someone who needed to be fixed, but as someone who deserved to be loved. Flaws and all. Henry's voice grew stronger, more confident. Learning to love myself was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it was also one of the most liberating. Because when you love who you are, you stop looking for validation from the outside. You realize you're enough, just as you are. Rediscovering the simple things. Henry shifted gears, his tone lighter. One of the biggest surprises on this journey was rediscovering the joy of simple things. For so long, I thought happiness had to be big and dramatic, winning awards, traveling the world, achieving milestones. But some of the happiest moments in my life have been the quiet ones. He shared a few examples. Walking my dog in the park early in the morning, feeling the sun on my face, cooking a meal from scratch and sharing it with friends, watching a sunset and realizing how beautiful the world can be. These are the moments that ground you, that remind you what life is really about. He smiled, his voice filled with gratitude. Happiness doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes, it's as simple as being present in the moment and appreciating what you have. Inspiring others. Henry concluded this part of his talk by reflecting on the ripple effect of his journey. As I started to change, I noticed something incredible happening. The people around me started to change too. My friends, my family, even my colleagues, they began opening up, taking better care of themselves, and finding their own paths to happiness. It was like my growth gave them permission to grow too. He looked out at the audience, his gaze steady. And that's why I'm here today, not just to share my story, but to remind you that your journey matters. When you choose happiness, when you choose authenticity, you inspire others to do the same. And that, my friends, is how we create a better world, one choice at a time. A moment of reflection. As Henry finished speaking, he invited the audience to take a moment to reflect. Close your eyes, he said, his voice gentle. Think about one thing that brings you joy. Could be a person, a place, an activity, or even just a feeling. Hold on to that thought. That's your reminder that happiness is always within reach. The room was silent, the energy palpable. When the audience opened their eyes, Henry could see the shift, a newfound sense of hope and connection. Thank you for being here with me, he said, his heart full. And thank you for reminding me why this journey matters. The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the impact of Henry's words. As Henry stood on the stage, the applause from the audience gradually subsided. He took a deep breath, a warm smile spreading across his face. The energy in the room was electric, yet deeply intimate, a shared understanding, a connection that words alone couldn't describe. I want to leave you with one final thought. Henry began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Happiness is not a destination. It's not a trophy you earn or a finish line you cross. Happiness is a practice, a choice you make every single day. The lesson that changed everything. Henry stepped away from the podium, walking slowly across the stage. For years, I chased happiness like it was something out there, something I had to achieve, win, or buy. I thought, if I just get this role, if I just make this amount of money, if I just hear this one compliment, then I'll finally be happy. But every time I reached those goals, I felt the same emptiness creeping back in. He paused, looking at the audience with sincerity. It wasn't until I stopped chasing and started being that everything changed. I stopped asking, what will make me happy? And started asking, what can I do today that feels good, meaningful, and true to who I am? A life reimagined. Henry described how his life transformed when he embraced this new perspective. I began to focus on the small things, the everyday choices that brought me peace and joy. I stopped comparing myself to others and started celebrating my own journey. I prioritized relationships, not for validation, but for connection. I gave myself permission to rest, to grow, and yes, to fail. He chuckled softly, a lightness in his voice. And you know what? I became happier than I ever thought possible. Not because I had everything I wanted, but because I learned to want what I had. A message to the audience. Henry turned back to the podium, his tone growing more earnest. I know that some of you sitting here today might be struggling. You might feel lost, or like happiness is something you'll never quite catch. To you, I want to say this: you are enough. Right here, right now, as you are. You don't need to do or be anything more to deserve joy. It's already yours, you just have to let yourself feel it. He paused, letting the words sink in. Start small. Focus on one thing that makes you feel good. One thing that brings you peace. Do it every day. And watch how your life begins to change. Happiness isn't about fixing your life. It's about finding the beauty in the life you already have. A final reflection. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. When he opened them, his gaze was steady and kind. Every one of us has a story. Every one of us has struggles. But every one of us also has the power to choose happiness, not by chasing it, but by creating it. And that's the most beautiful thing about being human. We can rewrite our story at any time. He smiled, his voice filled with gratitude. Thank you for letting me share my story with you today. It's been an honor. And I hope that, in some small way, my journey helps you on yours. The impact. The audience rose to their feet. The applause thunderous and heartfelt. Henry stood there, taking it all in, not with pride, but with humility and gratitude. As the applause began to fade, he left the stage, feeling lighter than he ever had before. It wasn't the applause or the recognition that filled him with joy. It was the knowledge that he had spoken his truth and, in doing so, had touched others' lives. Henry walked out of the auditorium, the evening air cool against his skin. He looked up at the stars, a quiet peace settling over him. For the first time in his life, Henry wasn't chasing anything. He was simply being, and that, he realized, was happiness. Moral of the story: happiness isn't found in what you achieve or acquire. It's found in the way you choose to live each moment. By focusing on what truly matters, connection, authenticity, and gratitude, you can create a life that feels meaningful and joyful, no matter the circumstances. Happiness is not a destination or something to chase. It is a practice of appreciating the present, embracing your journey, and finding joy in the simple, meaningful moments of life. True happiness comes from within by being authentic, nurturing connections, and learning to value what you already have. I'm so glad you spent this time with me. If you liked the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Take care, and see you next time.